Grus, the Iridian scientist, shrieked in terror as the Earth canine's fangs shredded his exosuit, ripping out vital control wires in a spray of sparks, paralyzing his robotic defense limbs. The creature's attack proved more devastating than any weapon Grus's captors had threatened him with so far. How could such a primitive beast damage his hyper-advanced technology? Just moments ago, the arrogant alien researcher had been smashing through his cell's force field in a desperate escape attempt, brutally electrocuting the human guards as they rushed in. Grus knew if he didn't escape the secret lab soon, the humans would inevitably break his will and extract all the advanced knowledge he held, dooming the Iridian Empire's plans for conquest. His species would be exterminated or enslaved if the barbaric Terrans gained any of his people's technological secrets. Now it all seemed futile, as the brown-furred creature stood over Grus's battered body, lips pulled back in a feral snarl, victory clear in its eyes. The alien had never seen such a beast during his secret surveillance of the Earth solar system. Was this mammal their secret weapon? Some sort of genetically engineered hunter? "Good boy, Ace, hold him," commanded the muscular ex-soldier that Grus had been grappling with seconds ago before the dog intervened. The man called Brian wiped blue blood off his face, then produced a glowing ring of metal. "Let's get a few answers before the spook squad shows up." As the human locked the high-tech cuffs around Grus's wrists, the Iridian realized he may have grossly underestimated this upstart species, especially if they could forge such loyalty in other creatures. What other surprises were these cunning Terrans hiding? Grus shivered under the cold stares of man and beast alike. He was beginning to doubt his people would ever conquer this world. Brian fumed as he stood at attention, enduring the harsh dressing down from his superiors. They railed at him for the extensive damage to the facility and for not subduing the alien before things escalated so drastically. Brian bit his tongue, resisting the urge to point out that Grus had already short-circuited the containment field and was seconds away from transmitting who knows what data to his people. The top brass begrudgingly acknowledged that the situation would have been a catastrophe if Grus had escaped, but that didn't spare Brian from their wrath. As punishment for the mess, Brian was ordered to oversee repairs of the wrecked containment room. And just to pour salt in the wound, Grus would be assisting him. The higher-ups wanted the alien kept busy to prevent further mischief. So for the next several days, Brian and Ace stood guard while a resentful Grus made repairs, the Iridian clearly despising every minute of the menial labor beneath his station. Insults flew back and forth as Grus worked, the two sniping at each other relentlessly. Grus never missed an opportunity to express his contempt for the primitive, barbaric human race, while Brian took every chance to knock the arrogant alien down a peg. "What was so important that you'd risk attacking my men, Squidward?" Brian growled, as Grus reassembled a damaged computer terminal. "What's on these computers that you want so badly?" Grus sneered, his tentacles writhing. "I was attempting to send a warning to my people about your kind's insidious secret weapons. We cannot allow your race to threaten the Iridian Empire." Brian raised an eyebrow. "Secret weapons? What are you talking about?" The alien gestured a long appendage contemptuously at Ace. "Those creatures you call dogs? Loyal, blindly obedient, fearless. They are the perfect biological weapons. Your kind has clearly bred them as attack beasts for war." Brian stared at Grus for a long moment, then burst out laughing as he realized the alien was completely serious. Ace tilted his head quizzically at the sudden guffaws. "Are you kidding me? You think we made dogs for war? They're pets, man. Companions. They aren't weapons." "Lies," Grus hissed. "Your creature ripped through my exosuit with ease. Such power could only be engineered for combat. Do not insult my intelligence with such a pathetic cover story." Brian opened his mouth to argue further, but quickly shut it as the base commander strode in, his face grim. "We have a situation. Long-range sensors have detected a massive buildup of Iridian warships at the edge of the solar system. They're clearly here to get Grus back." The alien scientist grinned smugly at the news, while Brian frowned deeply. This was very bad. The commander turned to Brian. "We need to move the prisoner to a more secure black site immediately. Prepare him for transport ASAP." "Yes, sir," Brian responded, shooting a glare at Gruss's smirk. The Iridian thought he had already won, but Brian would be damned if he let this smug squid face threaten his home. Tensions with the Iridians were about to hit a boiling point, and Brian knew his next actions could determine the fate of two worlds on the brink of war. Brian hastily snapped a pair of energy cuffs around Gruss's wrists, preparing to move the Iridian to a transport shuttle. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the facility, nearly knocking them both off their feet. Alarms wailed, and emergency lights flashed as frantic shouts erupted over the base intercoms about a perimeter breach. Gruss cackled maniacally, his tentacles writhing with glee. "You fools, those ships were merely a distraction for my warriors to infiltrate your pathetic defenses. Soon I will be free, and your entire species shall suffer for your arrogance." Enraged, Brian slammed his fist into Gruss's sneering face, sending the alien crumpling to the floor unconscious. "Shut up, Squid Boy, it's not over yet." With Ace running at his heels, Brian charged out into the hallways to join the defensive effort. It was pure chaos. Smoke choked the air, and the sounds of plasma fire and snarling dogs echoed everywhere. He caught glimpses of the base's German shepherds viciously attacking Iridian commandos. "Ace, go help them, boy. I'll catch up," Brian ordered. Ace gave a sharp bark of understanding and bounded off towards the sounds of fighting. Taking cover behind a piece of rubble, Brian finally got a good look at the enemy forces pouring in. Dozens of Iridian shock troops were marching through the breach, encased head to toe in sleek, mechanized armor. Humanity's weapons seemed almost useless against it. Spotting a group of human soldiers retreating under heavy fire, Brian popped out of cover to lay down suppressing shots with his rifle. A plasma bolt whizzed by his face, barely missing him, as he dropped 3 Iridians with precise hits to their visors. Brian ducked back to avoid the retaliatory hail of plasma. "Fall back to the labs," he shouted at his beleaguered comrades. "Establish choke points. We can't let them—" Searing agony exploded through Brian's shoulder as a plasma blast found its mark, sending him crashing face down to the floor, his rifle clattering away. Spots swam in his vision. He could hear the heavy tread of Iridian boots approaching. Suddenly a black canine blur streaked past Brian and crashed into the Iridian commando looming over him. It was Ace. The dog's powerful jaws clamped down on the alien's armor, sparks flying as he shredded vital systems. The Iridian howled in rage, trying to throw Ace off. Fighting through the pain, Brian lunged for a fallen plasma rifle at his fingertips. His hands closed around it, and he rolled onto his back, sighting the thrashing Iridian. Ace tore free just as Brian drilled the alien with a dead-center shot, dropping it instantly. "Good boy," Brian groaned as he staggered upright. Ace limped to his side, muzzle dripping with blue blood but eyes bright. More Iridians emerged from the smoke behind them, plasma rifles raised. "We can't stop them, not like this," Brian growled. He scooped up Ace in his arms, ignoring his shoulders' screaming protest, and sprinted down the corridor away from the advancing aliens. Brian slammed his hand on the emergency locks as he passed through the blast doors, sealing them shut with a resounding clang. The Iridians would burn through soon, but it bought precious time. He knew where they would go next, the containment room to regroup with Gruss, and that's exactly where Brian was headed, Ace still cradled in his arms. His mind raced as he ran, desperately trying to invent a plan to stop the invaders with just a single rifle and his wits. The fate of his species, maybe even the galaxy, hung in the balance. He had to succeed, no matter the cost. Brian charged into the containment room, his heart pounding as he took in the sight of Iridian commandos swarming over the computer terminals. Among them, he spotted Gruss, the alien scientist barking orders as his soldiers tried to hack into the system. In an instant, Brian realized their goal, stealing vital data on Earth's defenses. He couldn't let that happen. Setting the injured Ace down and ordering him to stay, Brian raised his stolen plasma rifle and opened fire. The blue bolts caught the Iridians by surprise. Several crumpled to the floor in smoking heaps, but the rest quickly rallied, returning fire in a blistering hail of plasma. Brian hurled himself behind a damaged terminal, narrowly avoiding incineration. Gruss's voice rose over the chaos, demanding the commandos forget the human and focus on breaching the system. Gritting his teeth, Brian popped up to squeeze off a few more shots, dropping another Iridian. A storm of plasma forced him back into cover. Warning indicators flashed on the rifle's display as its power cell ran low. Brian cursed under his breath, his options dwindling rapidly. Then his gaze fell on the exposed, sparking wires dangling from the shattered computer terminal. A desperate plan formed in his mind. Ignoring the vicious shocks, Brian wrenched the crackling cables free. With a defiant yell, he vaulted over his cover and hurled the sparking tangle of wires at the Iridians clustered around the computers. The makeshift weapons struck their armor in an explosion of brilliant sparks and arcing electricity. Alien screams filled the air as the connected soldiers spasmed and collapsed, their mechanized suits overloading catastrophically. The stench of burning flesh and circuitry choked the room. "No!" Gruss roared in fury. The scientist snatched up a fallen rifle and unleashed a withering barrage at Brian, driving him back behind cover. Even with half his force electrocuted, Gruss and the remaining commandos still outnumbered Brian. He couldn't hold them for much longer. Suddenly a black blur streaked past Brian's position. "Ace!" The wounded but relentless dog clamped his powerful jaws around Gruss's leg, dragging the shrieking Iridian to the floor. Alien and canine thrashed in a vicious tangle of gnashing teeth and straining tentacles. Seizing the momentary diversion, Brian lunged from cover and sprinted for the main computer terminal. Plasma bolts scorched the air around him. He slapped the emergency purge control with a shaking, bloodied hand. The screens flashed and went dark as the irreplaceable defense data wiped itself from existence. At the same instant, Gruss wrenched free of Ace's bite and smashed the dog away with a vicious blow. The Iridian leveled his rifle at the stunned animal. "No!" Brian cried, diving between them. He brought his own rifle to bear on Gruss as he hit the floor beside Ace. Man and alien froze, guns trained on each other in a lethal standoff, as smoke and sparks drifted through the wrecked containment room. Sweat dripped into Brian's eyes as he stood locked in the standoff with Gruss, neither one daring to twitch a muscle. The acrid stench of burnt circuitry and charred flesh hung thick in the air. Plasma rifles hummed, the charge building to a lethal crescendo. "TAS-CW!" A blue bolt lanced out from the side, striking Gruss in a spray of sparks and sizzling flesh. The alien crumpled with an agonized screech, his gun skittering away across the floor. Brian risked a glance toward the shot's source. There stood Ace, his paw still resting on a fallen Iridian's rifle trigger. The dog's flanks heaved with exertion, but his eyes gleamed with fierce determination. Brian's heart swelled with pride. "Good boy," he rasped, voice hoarse from smoke. Ace's tail wagged once weakly. Kicking Gruss' weapon out of reach, Brian advanced on the writhing alien. Viscous green blood pooled around Gruss, his breath coming in irregular gasps. "It's over, Squidward," Brian growled. "Call off your attack, Mutts. Surrender." Gruss managed a wet, gurgling laugh that devolved into a coughing fit. "You fool," he wheezed. "Too late. The ship, already set to self-destruct." Ice flooded Brian's veins. What are you talking about?" "The ship that brought us—" Gruss's tentacles twitched with vindictive glee. "Charges set to blow, collapse this whole place, bury you all." "You'll die too, you idiot," Brian snarled. "Worth it, to hurt you." Gruss spat a glob of green blood. Alarms began to wail, frantic and shrill. Brian cursed viciously. He should leave this traitorous scum to his fate, but then he looked at Ace, his truest friend and ally. The dog stood fast at Brian's side despite the pain that creased his furry face, refusing to leave his human behind. Just as Ace would never abandon him, Brian couldn't abandon his duty. With a roar of frustration, Brian wrenched Gruss up and slung the screeching alien over his shoulders in a fireman's carry. He staggered under the weight on his injured shoulder, but pushed forward. "Let's go, buddy!" Brian yelled to Ace. The faithful dog fell in beside him, limping heavily but still keeping pace as they sprinted for the elevator to the surface. Gruss thrashed and cursed, reopening his wound and spattering Brian's back with hot green blood. Brian ignored the alien's struggles, pouring every ounce of strength into pumping his legs faster. The ground quaked, throwing Brian and Ace off balance. Cracks split the floor, the groaning of overstressed metal filling the air. The base was coming apart. They reached the elevator shaft, just as a thunderous boom shook the entire complex. A massive fireball billowed up from below, the searing heat singeing Brian's hair. Jamming his fist against the elevator control, Brian prayed it still had power. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a ding almost lost in the destruction, the doors slid open. Brian and Ace tumbled inside, Gruss still screaming obscenities. Brian punched the button for the surface, watching the explosions rip through the base on the flickering monitors. The lift lurched into motion, the shaft shaking violently around them. Brian and Ace pressed against the wall, shielding Gruss with their bodies as metal shrieked and warped. Sunlight blinded them as the doors opened onto the surface. They stumbled out into the open air, sucking in greedy lungfuls. Kerboom! The ground heaved like an angry beast, throwing them all to the dirt. Brian curled protectively around Ace and Gruss, feeling the dog's warm weight pressed against his chest. The roar became deafening, then cut off abruptly, leaving an echoing silence. Brian raised his head, blinking grit from his eyes. Where the secret base had been, a massive crater now smoked. The underground levels had completely collapsed, burying everything and everyone in tons of rubble. Face whined softly, sniffing at Brian's face. He stroked a big calloused hand down the dog's flank to soothe him, but his eyes never left the destruction. How many lives had been lost with that base? Scientists, soldiers, staff, all gone in a flash of Iridian treachery. Rage burned cold in Brian's gut. Gruss's rattling cough brought his attention back to his prisoner. The alien looked a wreck, his exosuit shredded, emerald blood leaking from a dozen wounds. But still those black, fathomless eyes glared balefully at Brian. "You think your mutts will save you next time?" Gruss forced out between panting breaths. Brian looked at Ace, his fur matted with blood and soot, but still standing tall at his human side. The dog's brown eyes shone with unwavering loyalty and love. Meeting Gruss's hate-filled gaze squarely, Brian spoke with leaden certainty. "It's not the dogs you need to worry about." He gathered Ace close, feeling the dog's strong heartbeat against his own. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky as red as the day they'd all shed so much blood for. This battle was over. But Brian knew, staring out over the smoking ruin of the base, with his most faithful companion pressed to his side and his greatest enemy lying broken at his feet, that the war had only just begun. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.